Good evening, everybody, once again. My name is Peter Boda. I'm in Global Design Group of NIKKEN SEKKEI. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our next global series. If you have been with us before, you know the drill, but for those whose first time today is to participate, let me introduce our event. This event series started when we realized that we are at NIKKEN SEKKEI from more than 40 countries. But we don't know much about each other's origin, and there is some room to grow to improve our communication between us. And not just between us, but also in order to promote interaction between these cultures. And through our practice and presentations, we can also improve NIKKEN's global competitiveness in a much bigger picture. So this 1 hour series is to introduce our cultures to our fellow colleagues. Every time one person or more person from a selected country introduces their own culture and architecture, and then we have some casual free discussion. If you would like to utilize the Zoom subtitles today, it is available, and you can select a preferred language so you can follow up today's presentation because it is going to be in English. 本日のプレゼンテーションは英語になりますけれども、日本語の字幕もしくはその他の言葉の字幕を確認したい方は今画面に映っているように自分の端末で Zoom に入っていただいて、そこからサブタイトル、字幕をオンにしてから言葉を選択した上でフォローお願いします。本日は英語で進めてまいります。So, I said 40 countries. NIKKEN world map looks like this. And if you look at the event calendar, we have visited already 33 countries. I would like to say thank you again for those who participated in this event series in the past 18 months. As you see, a very, very diverse lineup has been introduced already. If you break down what kind of distribution do we have at NIKKEN, speaking about countries that we represent, you see here a quite interesting graph. And if I mark up the countries that we have already visited so far, you see that we just need a tiny little bit more presentations to fill up all these wide areas and complete our world touring coffee break. If you missed some of the previous series, we have the local archives available at K-Share Overseas platform, where you can revisit each of these wonderful presentations telling us the secrets of our beautiful world. I show you here a little bit of close-up of all these people who contributed to the local series so far. And as you see, I have so many slides for that because it's our 33rd event today. And I'm very happy to tell you that in the upcoming months, we are going to visit more and more countries to come. This is the way how you can access the K-Share platform if you haven't done so far. And before I stop this introduction, I would like to introduce you James, who is going to be the main speaker for today. Hopefully, we will have a little time in the end for your questions. It will depend on how far we go. And I would like to bring your attention that after the local event today, we will have a farewell reception for our Thai members who are reside in Chikuba unit. You are welcome to that as well. And at the same time, the pinned bar is going to feature an Indian-themed spice bar, which is also a good opportunity for us to continue the discussion that we'll engage today. So be prepared for a long journey and an interesting one. And I would like to give the stage to James.
Thank you, Peter. When Peter invited me to do this talk, it was actually 1 year ago. And we ended up substituting Tom, I think, took over the United States. I realized immediately that I don't know anything about American architecture. What is American architecture even? So I made a decision that I don't know if it'll go over very well here today, but I made a decision to do this talk. And Peter suggested I use ChatGPT, which I thought, oh, that's a great idea. I'll just write a report about American architecture. That would be perfect. And then I thought about the great presentations I've seen some of you do here in Local, and it made me think that perhaps that it should really focus on people, maybe about architects. So what if we did this about architects? And I did this. I printed this report out on a PDF, and I started reading it, and I fell asleep. And so I thought, if it made me fall asleep, it'll probably kill you. So I changed my mind, and I did this story about my own architectural journey to come to Japan. I don't know. I know a lot of people are interested in how these foreigners got to Japan, but I don't know if this is effective or not. I called it Journey to Japan Through Architecture. So I hope this different approach is acceptable and not too self-promoting. I really want to talk about one place, 4 people that have influenced me or mentored, and maybe 7 projects if we have enough time. This is most of America. Oh, look, the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm from here. This is northern Minnesota and Wisconsin, right on the border. And this is the largest lake in the world, freshwater lake, 10% of the world's freshwater, including freshwater locked up in ice today. This is Japan at the same scale, but more importantly, at the same latitude. And you can see the northern tip of Hokkaido is about the same latitude as my hometown. And that is important because the weather is kind of similar. Although this doesn't look like it. These are some photos from where I grew up, where my mom still lives, in the house I grew up in. You could walk there from my mom's house, or a short bike ride. And Lake Superior, again, is very cold, very clear, very clean water, but annual average temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. And you might go, you can't swim in that. People winter surf in this lake. But in the summertime, of course, the water is much warmer on the shorelines around the beaches. I'll show you some of those. Lake Superior is connected to the ocean. You can see here, it's not really so much canals as it is lifts, or what they call locks. There's, I think, 16 locks that lift the boats. So ocean-going vessels show up in my hometown every single day. And the storms that are developed over the Great Lakes, you can see this is covering probably half of North America, are like typhoons. They're not called typhoons, of course, or even called any kind of name. They're storms. And I venture to say that the winds and the rains off of Lake Superior rival any typhoon you've ever seen in Japan or any. They're quite vicious. These people are taking their life in their own hand. This is the seaport entry to the port of Duluth. And these 2 pure walls you see, concrete walls on either side, remember those. That's the port entry. You'll see them in the next slide here. And this is that same port. I circled in red there. Those pure walls you can see, and there's a bridge behind them. I'll show you in a moment. Maybe our most famous local bridge. Well, it was in a previous photo. These are the kinds of ships that come in every day. There's Lakers, the one in the foreground. The one in the background right behind the Laker is an ocean-going vessel we call Salties. And there are people I grew up with who memorized the flags of every country. I never found that as an interesting hobby, but they certainly were good at it. This is a boat moving through the pier. I won't show this whole clip. It's something I stole off of Instagram. But you can see the aerial lift bridge in a moment. Right there, it's lifted up. That's for a car bridge connecting this Minnesota point. And this Minnesota point is quite long. A couple other really famous bridges. You'll get better pictures of these in a moment. But interestingly, they're called the High Bridge and the Bong Bridge. And that might make some of you laugh. But the High Bridge, I saw Joe Biden standing in front of this bridge like 6 months ago, announcing it's going to be rebuilt. And this is the Bong Bridge. You're going to hear all about Richard Bong in a moment, who that bridge is named after. But there's I don't know how many kilometers long. I was going to check Google Earth, this public beach on Minnesota Point. but it's fully developed with houses. But they're on the beach, but they're set so far back from the beach and so far above it, you almost don't see them because the beach is public again. But this beach continues for 5 kilometers into the Wisconsin side. So this is how we grew up in the summer and autumn in Duluth Superior, fishing every day almost and camping every weekend. I can't remember not doing something outdoors that involved water and sports and so on. And in the winter, of course, we were skiing and skating. In fact, I remember putting this together. I remember my parents met on a skating rink. So I attribute ice skating to my existence. Just some images of downtown Duluth, and you can see it's a hillside city here by looking at this same clock tower from the front and the back. There you go, the clock tower from the top of the hill and from the bottom of the hill. You can tell that the tallest buildings in downtown Duluth aren't very big. This is where I come from. These are the skyscrapers we would work on, but they were usually renovations. So small town, right? Small town architecture. Not maybe too interesting. But the hill, I always found the hill fascinating, and I think having a hill city like San Francisco, only really much colder, and a linear city was interesting. And some people drive vehicles like this. I've always driven 4-wheel drive cars or SUVs, small SUVs, but because you can't get home if you live on top of the hill. After work, if it snowed during the day, and it snows 7 months of the year there, you won't get home. Interestingly, Duluth City started occupying or taking over space in buildings as an easement about 35 years ago. And they gradually did this and connected the entire downtown with skywalks and bridges that are not so beautiful, but it's really nice. You can literally go from your attached garage in your private residence, drive to work in a parking ramp, walk to your office through these skywalks, and never wear a winter coat in minus 50-degree Fahrenheit weather. 5 kilometers of skywalk, and maybe about the same in a lake walk outside. But make no mistake, I mean, North America, all of it, Canada and Mexico included, this is a place, even Central America and South America, fully occupied for the last 10,000 plus years by indigenous people, until Europeans came along and the Native Americans tried to defend themselves by factioning into groups, basically, and also adapting to ways of living on the earth that were different. These are just 10 tribes that were in the immediate tri-state area around me. And so I grew up in primarily Ojibwe culture, lots of Chippewa. Chippewa Ojibwe is actually the same. The languages are a little bit different, but the same basic tribal group. So it's a place of deep indigenous and even the names, Wisconsin, Minnesota, even Lake Superior's Gitchagumi, they're all Native American names, and I had no idea. Probably learned it in elementary school and then forgot it immediately. But my parents used to take us to these cool Native American festivals. I think they call powwows. I don't know if that's politically correct today. But I remember just even as a small child wanting to get inside these natural built shelters that the natives built, and these were mostly on display for just public use, not for someone living in it. But it somehow felt different than camping. It felt like home. And so I insisted, Dad, I said to my dad, this was my father, when you have black hair and these, olive skin and that big nose, you must be Native American. And he said, no, look at my blue German eyes. And I said, oh. So Native American art also impressed me, and it wasn't until I started traveling in Japan 27 years ago that I found similarities in some Japanese arts and crafts as well. Shapes from nature and bright colors, which I think is common in many cultures. One other thing about my dad, he was a newspaper printer. He's just a pressman, blue collar, dirty hands job at a newspaper, the Duluth News Tribune. But he was a really well-known world coin collector. I thought he was a drug dealer because he'd get these packages from Colombia and from places around the world. And he tried to get my brother, my sister, and I to collect coins as kids, and we never did. But he would give me coins from time to time. And as a young boy, I remember him giving me this coin. Actually, I carry it with me sometimes. Just,
Is that in the photo?
yeah,
Oh.
that's me in the photo, yeah. I don't remember. This is the first time I think my dad, and last time he ever wore a tie, I never remembered it. Probably me too. But my parents were somehow addicted to these tourist traps, I call them, places like you've never heard of, House on a Rock, a place that developed over like 40 years. This family built this bizarre house with weird collectibles in it. And they would take us to Al Capone, a mafia boss, you know, Yakuza guy, his hideout. Or my favorite was this Cave of the Mounds. What a great name. And I think we went there a couple of times. My mom, who's still living in, she just can't remember if we ever went to any of Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings, but rest assured there are plenty of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings around Minnesota, Wisconsin. Even a gas station just outside of Duluth that's still there with a long cantilever, you know, almost as long as ones that wheel. Not really. But Frank's work was something we actually learned in elementary school because I went to elementary school on the Wisconsin side of the bridge. So you had to learn about him a little bit. And I was a teenager when I read Frank Lloyd Wright's Natural House book. But I knew there was something different about his work, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And I don't know if I ever really did, but I brought this book today too, because this book really changed my mind, not to study Frank, but to come to Japan. This is the book that made me think, why focus on Frank? You know, because there's something very Japanese about his work, I thought. About the patterns, the textures, sort of the reveals, lots of details. But then when I saw this, and this is in the book, might have a page mark on it, I don't know. But this is the Hoen style plan form of a Nikko temple, Taiyuingyo temple. And he visited this place, I know, in 1905. The same year Unity Temple is which reminds me of my favorite Canadian rock band, the Bare Naked Ladies, who said, it's all been done before. So I think we all know that, you know, architecture, much of this business is built on the shoulders of others. And I like to think about, you know, who mentored who. Of course, we know who mentored Frank Lloyd Wright, but because I've somehow felt like an imposter to architecture through my whole career. And it's partly because I'm an imposter because I didn't go to a great Ivy League school. I went to a technical architecture background training and I started working in architecture at 17 years old. And so for some reason I have this sort of self-doubt that is built into my feeling of being an architect. So I wanted to tell you about some of the people's shoulders I stood on to get to Japan and how that sort of got me here in small ways. It was more than the fun. The first job I had in 1980, I was finished one semester of school. I was still 17 though. I went to a summer semester and got out of high school a little early, not because I was smart, because they wanted me out of the school. I was a troublemaker, probably. And Davi was amazing. He was 71 years old when he hired me, former University of Illinois professor of architecture. And we bonded over music. I was in a band at that time and he played piano, jazz piano. And we both had listened to this album like 100 times, my favorite jazz album. Anybody know this album? Yay! And so, yeah, he taught me the ropes and I stood on his shoulder to learn the really important things that I didn't know I needed to know. And it wasn't even about business yet. Immediately, my work was about ridiculous things that nobody can see. If you ever feel like you're working on something that no one will see, I did a lot of that with roof replacements and masonry repair projects on state-owned buildings and campuses around Wisconsin, Minnesota. It was a really good education now that I think back on it, but then I don't know that I was very appreciative of it. Having to learn these things about specifications and, you know, historic window replacements, it seemed really boring and not necessary to know. But it turns out it was. Energy efficiency projects were really popular in the 80s after the oil crisis. And I don't know if there's a precursor to the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we did a heck of a lot of elevator additions and ramps and barrier-free renovations, which was a good basis for a background in design. This is the third mayor of Superior, Wisconsin's house And it never looked like this. My whole life it looked like this. In fact, I never knew it had a cupola. Nobody ever told me. It blew off in 1950, many years before I was born. And I just thought it had a turret on it like this without a cupola. And so the first job that was built that I could drive by with my parents and go, I did that, was this. Davi asked me to recreate this cupola from measurements from where the photographer might have stood with a compass and a microscope. And we did that. And I think I was 21 or 22 years old, not yet licensed when this was created. And the cool thing about that project is that house would come back into my life like 16 years later in a really interesting way. In 89, 9 years after working for Davi, he was retiring 80 years old. He seemed like 60. But a couple of architects I know in Duluth said, James, you should come and join us. We're going to join this structural engineering firm. I said, yeah, I know them. I've worked with them a lot. He said, we're going to join them. It's a great idea. It's a terrible idea because none of the other architects in town will hire these engineers after we join them. And my friend said, oh, you're right. That might happen. I said, let's do it. And we did. And it was probably the best decision I ever made in my life. We formed a new firm, LHB, and Lauren Larson was the L in Larson, or the Larson in Larson Harville and L in LHB. And Lauren was a great mentor to me up until when I moved to Japan. And we bonded over music, bicycle, and somehow Japan. And he had his son, his oldest son, Peter. And Peter was living and working in Japan, married to a Japanese woman. And what was Peter doing in Japan? He was working for Apple, releasing the Apple Newton, the first PDA predecessor, you could say, to the iPhone. This is the father of the iPhone, the grandfather. And I stood on Lauren's shoulders for many things, but I would say primarily leadership and business skills. So this is a campus project that burned in 1915. So it really never looked like that. Just like every project an architect gets involved with that's a retrofit, you don't get the building usually in the condition that it was originally. So this building had no historic fabric on the inside, a wood structure inside. And so we bombed it and gutted the building. That's actually me on the job site in the yellow hard hat talking to this construction worker. Every week he would stop me. I remember his name to this day, Toivo, great Finnish name. And Toivo would come to me and say, James, I gotta tell you about my son. He's going to architecture school at the University of Milwaukee. And it was so fun to talk to this guy. This project was just a series of, in the series of doing historic preservation was, we learned along the way. Thank you. And I stood on the shoulders of my team. I don't have a photo of the people that worked on this building. I searched for some of them, so I used this ridiculous photo. But like all architecture and design and construction, it's a team sport, I feel. And I think that's another reason for self-doubt for me is the sort of inability to be a Frank Lloyd Wright, right? To do everything yourself kind of thing. That building, by the way, had a lot of Native American art. I was allowed to commission people to design elements that carried Native American studies sort of lessons. I interviewed this Native American studies director and designed this marble turtle inlay, which is a really cool. I learned later that this turtle story is kind of worldwide, but it's definitely North American wide because the turtle is seen as the Turtle Island is North America. And I actually ran into a Canadian in Tokyo. And I don't know what we were talking about. He mentioned we were having a beer and he mentioned Turtle Island. I said, oh, you know that? And he said, oh, yeah, I grew up in Toronto. We heard the Turtle Island thing. I love this story so much. I actually wrote a children's book about it last year, but I'm struggling with my editing and my illustration is not very good. Long before I ever came to Japan, I started getting involved in sister cities because I thought this would be an interesting way to connect to Japan without moving here, and I didn't have any way to move here, no job or no idea. And so I got involved in Duluth Sister City, which is Ohara, and Ohara became the Sumi City, and I helped co-found the Anmachi Sister City in Ibaraki Ken. And that led to me and my family hosting a lot of students from Japan about 21 students and 2 taiko drummers. And this was mainly for my now adult children to get some exposure to international culture growing up. But quickly we learned in the office that doubling the size of the firm every year for the 4th year in a row will just about put us out of business. Our accountant, I remember this old guy coming to a board of directors meeting and slamming his fists on the table and screaming at us that we're going to fail. And what was it about? It was about cash flow. And then all those stupid business things that you didn't want to learn in college because you wanted to study architecture, I presume. You have to learn if you're going to run, manage, own, and control a business as a senior partner and shareholder. And so this was not what I wanted to do, especially, but we had to do. And this is how I really got close to Lauren Larson and how he carried me. But one of my partners, an architect from Minnesota, also he and I were the only two who were just hung up on nature and the environment, and we wanted to do more environmental architecture. We made our own rating system before LEED existed. We joined the U.S. Green Building Council right when it launched as one of the initial founding firms. And we didn't have this chart or anything like it, but we were trying to reach for this place above sustainable. And we didn't know what it was. We didn't have the word regenerative. We didn't know what any of these terms might have meant. So we stuck on healthy building design and high performance building design and healthy homes and healthy buildings. And this focus brought us these health houses. And we didn't even do a lot of housing at the time. We were kind of avoiding housing. But this kind of nonprofit housing was really successful for us and got widely published using the latest ideas in indoor air quality and thermal comfort and no carpetings and the ability for materials to be selected that don't off-gas toxic chemicals. And that project led to this multiple chemical sensitivity woman, a woman with MCS, highly sensitive to everything, including wood, couldn't have any natural wood in the house. And we tested her in a chamber with her doctor present in case she went into an anaphylactic shock. In this project, we did a lot of research, lost a lot of money, and we invested it back in educating people about healthy building design. I finally got to Japan in October '97. Of course, I had the bicycle. I brought just my bike and some camping gear. I had to cycle to the 2 sister cities I mentioned, and then I found myself often hopping the train to get to a new place because the weather was absolutely terrible. And when I left Japan, though, so happy, I thought I might never be back in Japan again because there's no way. I have a job. I have young kids at home. There's just no way I'm getting back here. Except I got a fax 3 months later, and the fax came from one of my clients who knew I had an affinity for Japan, but he also knew I had this connection to environmental architecture. And this is a resource-efficient wood framing system invented in Japan, and by a friend of mine, who created a proprietary CAD system that did cost estimating, structural calculations, and it created the CNC, computer numerically controlled cut file to cut an entire house in a half a day, the whole wood package. And that wood package could be put together by any volunteers here on the stage in 1 day to get to this level, or usually weather-tight enclosed if it were professional builders. No saw, no tape measure. It's invented by Masao Kato, and he's still a close friend. In fact, we took my family there a couple years ago to fly around with his plane. My son wants to be a pilot. I helped Masao with no contract. I did it very Japanese way, no contract, just a handshake, and I did the structural testing of his system, code adaptations, and helped him get code approval in the United States. And then one of my landscape architects and an interior designer, they wanted to build a house out of the system, and we cut this with American lumber. A lot of people think we shipped it from Japan. We didn't do that. We cut it in America with hand tools. I cut it with a friend from Kato Sangyo, who isn't Japanese. He's from Spain. You'll see him in the next slide, I think. Yeah, that's him, Santos Martin. He worked for Kato Sangyo then, and he ended up marrying Masao's oldest daughter. So Santos and I are still in touch today. I'm trying to get him to go back to Japan from Madrid. And so Santos and I ended up getting a lot of news because we ended up building 12 houses with volunteers and students and office workers. And putting these system housing from Japan together brought great attention. And Masao was so excited that he invited me back to Japan to help him sell the entire company when he turned 58. And when he turned 58, we sold everything to a Japanese company. It's now owned by NICE. If you know the NICE housing system in Japan, they call that system Power Build. This is that house I mentioned would come back to me in a big way. I was on the preservation committee at this historical society was occupying the building. But for 42 years, it was occupied by an orphanage, children without parents, and famous actors and actresses. And this is a baseball player, famous baseball player, Babe Ruth, from the New York Yankees came to see the kids. But for 42 years, you'd think it'd be really damaged, and it wasn't that damaged. But the exterior still looked like this. It was a really terrible design, and I put together a national team to do the restoration of this building so that it would be fully funded. First of all, to raise funds for a building like this, they want to put the trust in a really big national firm. So being a tiny firm, just 100 or 200 people, we hired another firm, Quinn Evans, to consult with. Quinn Evans is well-known preservation architecture firm in the United States. Only one remaining Pilaster Capitol here. We took it down, cleaned it, restored it, and then took castings of it to make a whole bunch of column capitals that were missing. And stories like that. This project got published in a book. I'll pass this around. I don't know how often this happens, and NIKKEN publishes a lot of great books about great buildings you all work on. But I never had anybody fund a book, and half the pictures in the book are my stupid construction photos, like these craftsmen who were just amazing, scraping paint all day with an X-Acto knife in a tiny little area, just to determine under a microscope the original colors, patterns, and they created these full-scale hand-drawn text templates or stencils. And then they would take them back to a factory and cut those stencils with laser and bring them back and restore the building. David Evans was the partner of Quinn Evans, who I worked with primarily, and he brought Gail Winkler to the table, who is a nationally known expert on Victorian interiors. If you don't have somebody like this on your team, you don't get these kind of projects in a small town, in northern Minnesota. Sadly, David died just literally a few months before the grand opening of this project, at the age of 50. And it's just terribly sad, and I was asked by the author of this book to write the dedication to David. But the interior looked just like the building looked when Martin Pattison first took ownership back in the 1890s. All the decorative paintings and the carpets. The carpets were originally hand woven in Oxford, England. We had the order file, so the new carpets were actually made to match the colors, textures, patterns, and fiber of the original carpets. Maybe my environmental powerhouse project that Rick and I were so excited to get this project because it's a student housing project on a small, environmentally focused campus in northern Wisconsin, on the shores of Lake Superior also, by the way. And this project ended up winning the American Institute of Architects AIA COTE, or Committee on the Environment, Top 10 Award in the year 2000. And I partnered on this project with David Bircher, who was a well-known master plan architect with HGA in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And David, I don't know what it is with Davids and architects, but he also passed away about 4 years after this project opened. He was an amazing guy. I used to go camping with his family. Anyway, this is the first dormitory in the United States to use composting toilets. And by the way, I checked last year, I emailed some people at the campus, they're still using the composting toilets. But the code officials, those darn code officials, they would not recognize these as toilets, and so we had to put conventional toilets right next to them. Now, a project that I almost don't want to talk about, but it's the war project. I don't know, everybody grows up not liking war, but I grew up particularly knowing that there's absolutely no way I can be in the US military. There's just no way I could do it. I can't physically think or imagine myself joining the military because I was growing up during the Vietnam War, and every night on the news, images would be pounded into our heads that really made me sad. And so we grew up hearing about this guy that was born in the same area I was in Superior, and Richard Bong, which that bridge is named after. And this plane stood on the edge of town for 40 something years that the government gave. He flew the P-38. This is the fastest airplane in World War II from the American side. And he was the eighth of eighth. An eighth is somebody who shoots down 5 planes. This guy apparently was a good aim and had 40 planes down. Fortunately, we got to work with his wife. She was still alive when we designed this World War II Heritage Center in his name. And Marge was really great to work with. I went to air shows for 9 years. It took this project 9 years to get built, from hiring to construction crews, because we were fundraising. And that's Marge standing in front of her own photo that Dick had put on her plane, on his plane. The next president of my company on the left, and my marketing director on the right. Dick and Marge were married in a local church right in my hometown, and Hollywood came to film them because he was such a big star, I guess, at the time, doing these war bond tours. And that church, I would later do restoration for probably about a 10-year period. Dick and Marge, again, he's pulled out of the war in February of 1945. The war hasn't ended. And they honeymooned, and he wouldn't marry her until the war was over. He said, I don't want to leave a widow before the war ends. So they honeymooned in the Redwood Forest of California. He test piloted the XP-80, the Lockheed Martin, the first jet America ever made. This is the immediate following plane to the P-38. He had flown it hundreds of times. But this one particular day in August of 1945, August 6th, 1945, he took off, and about 100 meters off the ground, his jet flamed out. It didn't stall. With a stall would be when you pull the nose up, but it flamed out, and he pulled the canopy back, and he had a parachute on, of course, and he was climbing out of the plane, and he even deployed his parachute before he got out of the plane, because he was that low. But the plane hit the ground. Marge told me that she heard about it while she was sunning herself on the deck, because in those days they didn't notify next of kin before they reported it. But this newspaper infuriates me. It's the Los Angeles Times from that era, and it says, the title, "The atomic bomb hits Japan," makes it sound like it was an accident. It's like what would be called clickbait today. Even the subtitle is wrong. The jet plane explosion kills major bomb. That's wrong. You know the story. The jet flamed out. It may have exploded when it hit the ground, but it didn't explode in the air. It's kind of implied. So, less than 6 months after their wedding, Marge was back in the church in Superior, the same church, and Dick was laid to rest. And the Heritage Center turned out fine. The whole center of the museum was the plane. That plane I showed you in the beginning on the sticks outside, we took it down. Volunteers restored it. All volunteers, no cost. 100%. This plane is worth $1.2 million at the end of the restoration, and helped fund some of the building. And the only thing that isn't connected is the instrument panel is not wired. So this is a perfectly flyable plane, but we would never fly it. Pretty glad I went to that museum. Look at that young guy. Apparently, a family I know in Minnesota, they have the wife is half Japanese, and she has family, of course, in Japan. And she connected with me with them over many of my visits during the Kato Sangyo days. And I brought my surveying equipment to design a house for them in Nagano-ken in Fujimi. And it was really fun to work with somebody on an American-style house in terms of space and elbow room and room sizes, but with a slightly Japanese aesthetic they were interested in, of course. And that was really fun for me to do something that was built in Japan. And the father of the bride designed this beautiful stained glass panel next to the entry door, and the husband of the house did the pottery for these sinks. And we designed in these tokonoma, kind of modern tokonoma for his pottery work. It's really fun. So working at a stupid small firm, in northern Minnesota, where you're just really an unknown, you end up working on such a wide variety of projects. It's kind of stunning. That's actually my firstborn daughter, figure skate. She was a competitive figure skater. And you get to design hockey rinks to surgical suites. And it's mind blowing because you're not an expert at anything. I feel like a generalist, if there ever was one. And Otaka-san knows my story. I never thought I would leave my own firm, but in 2007, I was invited by Rocky Mountain Institute to join them in Colorado. And my children were adults and grown up and had left home. And I was going through a divorce, so I thought, why not join? And I left my own firm after almost 20 years and joined this global nonprofit sustainability and energy consulting firm, headed by Amory Lovins. If you don't know Henry, he's one of the brightest minds in physics living, in energy today. He's written 40 books on the topics of energy and carbon. And he loves Japan, so whenever he comes through Japan, I actually met him more times in Japan after I left RMI than when I was there, because he was traveling the world, and then he made us travel the world. And I didn't like traveling, but I learned a lot about storytelling and accuracy from Amory. And a lot about flight miles. My first tall building experience, we did the renovation to Empire State Building at Rocky Mountain Institute, not as architects, but as sustainability consultants. That's the kind of role they would play, working with the architects of record. And I didn't work much on that building because I was leading this one. I did peer review reports. This is Deutsche Bank Twin Towers, nothing to do with American architecture, but I thought it was my only tall building experience I probably had on my resume when I joined NIKKEN. Nothing interesting in the small project. This is the first LEED platinum retrofit of a tower, I think, in the world. Mario Bellini designed this amazing lobby. That was his only scope, and it was just a super great response to what the brief was. And we created these crazy ideas that Deutsche Bank never did, but they asked us to do for them. They did put operable windows. The quiz question for tonight at the bar you have to answer is, how did the architects fit 20%, 300 people more in each tower without increasing the tower sizes? So think about that, and let's talk at the bar. And after 37 trips to Japan, believe it or not, a lot of carbon, and over 18-year period, I felt like my dream of living and working in Japan was really coming to an end. And so I had given up. And I suddenly got an email in 2014 from this guy who still lives in Japan. And this guy had remembered I spoke at a conference and met him in 2009. And I was speaking on behalf of Rocky Mountain Institute here in Tokyo, and he remembered me saying, I really want to move to Japan. And he emails me and says, hey, James, if you still want to move to Japan, KPMG Sustainability is hiring you going into the built environment space to work on buildings. I said, as an architect? And he said, not as an architect, but as an energy consultant. I said, okay, if I can live in Japan, I'm there. And literally 4 months later, I was here, early 2015, and joined AIA Japan. Of course, my membership transferred from Colorado. And then AIA Japan people introduced me to NIKKEN. And that's how I met Otaka-san on the first day I walked in here, December of 2015. And Otaka-san has been a real guiding light for me because I think everybody knows him here probably, but 43 years with NIKKEN, right? Am I right on 43? Okay. And so I didn't realize he was taking me under his wing until we traveled from Hokkaido to Kyushu and all places in between. And he taught me about architecture and let me know he was a musician to connect over. And also nature. I found out that he has this love of nature that I share his passion. And I think I stood on your shoulders, Otaka-san, because you taught me more about not only NIKKEN, which you know the history of NIKKEN very well, but you taught me more about Japan than I thought. I thought I already knew so much, but I realized with you I knew nothing. And so You also taught me about respect. I think respect was the thing I needed to improve my level of respect in Japan. Still working on it. I get asked a lot because I do such weird things, and I think they're weird. Maybe they're not. I don't work on designs of new buildings that you all might work on. I do a lot of story writing and storytelling for our projects. And my dream is that Nikken would let me have my business card say chief storyteller someday, but they probably want that person to be speaking Japanese, not English. So writing stories for these awards continued. There are so many more. My favorite being this Global Cooling Prize. We didn't know we were the winner of this $1.2 million grand prize, Nikken and NIKKEN. And Sir Richard Branson got on the Zoom call at 3 a.m. with us. Well, it was 3 a.m. here, not where he was. And he said, and the winner is NIKKEN and NIKKEN SEKKEI. So just remember, you work at NIKKEN SEKKEI. I love this building. A lot of people worked on this probably from Osaka office and maybe from Tokyo. After I toured this building, by the way, I don't remember seeing a green plant in that building when we toured it. Not a single plant. But I said, this is the most biophilic building I've ever seen in my life. So I emailed my friend Bill Browning, who's the leading authority on biophilic design in North America. He's written the books. And Bill used to work at RMI, by the way. And Bill said, James, there's going to be a biophilic design award next month. It becomes available. And we submitted this building, and San and I went to pick up our honorable mention award in the first biophilic design. And of course, Kumamoto Station ended up winning that. But what you might not know is Tomatsu-san and Inoue-san did a podcast, American architecture podcast called Details. Maybe the most popular architecture podcast in the world with millions of downloads. And I trained with them to help them with their English. It was really fun. I personally hate writing. I love having written with my Nikken colleagues. Often with Otaka-san as a translator, getting the stories out of my Nikken colleagues in Japanese to be translated into an English that made sense. And then writing for national publications was really fun. I think this is the last thing, I hope. And this is my desk in 2016 on the 5th floor. I stood up and I took this picture. I think Horikawa-san is sitting on my left side and maybe Otaka-san on my right or behind me. And I was complaining to Horikawa-san every day about how nasty our office was. And he said, shh, I'm designing it. I'm like, where is he? Can I meet him? And he said, why don't you just, and I love this guy, by the way, this guy invented a new kind of a horizontal shoji, which I really love. I took pictures like this as a hobby. And I took pictures of torn carpets and damaged walls. And I went on every floor, not every day, and not every week. And I counted how many people were in the office. And I told Horikawa-san, if we got rid of 30 or 40% of the desks, nobody would notice if we sat free address. We could just let people sit wherever they want. That ended up becoming some design ideas. He asked me to put a PowerPoint together, which we did. And it was used in, I don't know what it's called, Discovery Peaks it was, and then media. I don't know what it's called today. This was the ID 200 competition we had in the NUP group. Anyway, it got funded and it got built. I like to think it was the predecessor to PINS because the 7th floor was a test renovation. These are just some of the talks. So we started out talking about Native American and Indigenous people's shelter and the influence it had on certainly me in my part of the woods where I grew up. I hope the little trip through some of those preservation buildings weren't too boring. We did a little bit of prefab or pre-cut with the Japanese housing system. And I feel like all of us are moving towards neo-traditionalism, whether we want to or not. This is just my feeling, personal feeling, because neo-traditionalism is this idea of architecture rooted in place that uses local symbolism. That's something that might carry heritage or religious symbolism, but it's all about place. And that is shown in the Living Building Challenge. It's about place. There's a big part of the rating system, the world's most aggressive rating system. And we're moving towards restorative and even regenerative buildings in architecture. And that's where we're going to end up, or whether we like it or not. And I feel like it's just a loop back to indigenous people's architecture. So come and see me in Shikoki-Tozawa. That's where I'm usually hanging out. If I'm not playing in a band somewhere or sitting in for somebody, then I'm trying to scare people with a guitar in the parks there, or getting kicked off the streets by the police who know me on a first name basis and all. And they're so nice here. They're so nice to me. Hey, you can't do this. So I'm kind of a terror in Tokyo. Much like an American werewolf in London, I'm an American architect in Japan. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you for this very, very insightful and very private presentation.
It's too private.
So I think this is on private.
I just put this at the end in case it was question and answer time.
Yeah, so we have time actually for one or two quick questions from you if you have. And after that, I would like to transport everybody to the highway side to continue the discussion and have the next venue. So do you have any good questions right now to James?
Nobody.
This is your chance. Usually it's the time when everybody's so shy.
Oh, yeah, me too. I'm not worried about it. If there's no pressure, it's great. Oh, who's all being?
What have you learned? Over these 2 decades, what have you learned about yourself, architecture, people, anything specifically?
What have I learned over these decades as an architect? I'm guessing everybody's mileage may vary. You know, the way you approach architecture is very individual, isn't it? It seems like it. And I don't know if there's like something that broadly strokes, that I could in broad strokes say, you know, everybody must do or should do. You know, for example, everybody doesn't need to know building science to be a great designer. I'm sure some of the best designers in the world know nothing about building science. It just ended up being a path for me in that case. Or not every architect is even good at business. Take Frank Lloyd Wright. He made more money selling Japanese art than he ever made from all of his architecture combined. So he was a terrible businessman, but a great designer. So I don't know. I feel like it's an individual thing, people. I don't know. Is that a bad answer? You can answer it.
Anybody else?
Yes, so I think how we met.
Yes.
Michael in Finland.
Yes.
And I think he told me that there's a large immigrant community of most of the
Yes.
people that actually come from they gathered in Minnesota. And I did look up in the internet. There are a lot of Finnish names.
Yes.
But looking at the townscape or cityscape, even though it's a city of immigrants, I actually don't see
No.
much of a Finnish cityscape other than the log house that is painted red.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So,
That's
what is your Finnish influence that you gained from living here?
It's what I'm designing right now. A Finnish sauna.
Really?
I call it sauna for someone because I don't have any clients, but it's something I'm doing on my own to work. But most of the Finnish influence I saw, or even remotely knew about, was rural. And rural, by the way, is about 10 minutes on a bicycle riding, and you're in the countryside. And I mean that by most of the people I knew that came from Finnish families in this region lived outside of the city, very close to nature, which resonates with the sort of Finnish climate.
Yes, I way of life.
Yeah. And so I was just learning that also that in many saunas, I just found that out today. It's something I read this morning. But I experienced a lot of Finnish saunas with my Finnish high school friends. And that's why I feel like there's a return to saunas in Japan, actually. Or I don't know if it's a return or an emergence, but I've heard that it's become a popular.
Yes, I think there's a second boom of sauna.
Yeah, second boom of sauna. Can you do it with a Finnish accent? I don't know how to do it.
Yes.
Sauna.
By the way, the construction worker that you said,
Toivo.
Toivo actually means hope in Finnish.
Hope?
Yes, hope.
Oh, hope.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for that.
There's
I'm going to remember that.
Yes.
Thank you, very kindly.
And I think Harvara is also a Finnish family.
Oh, yes.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We had one question from Rob from Buchan from Australia. He asked, how do you see yourself in 10 years? Let's this be our closing remark for today. Good question.
Probably dead. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know. I don't want to be, but I don't know the answer to that. That's a terribly difficult question. Thank you for asking it. Boy, I hope I'm still connected to architecture in some way. I told Otaka-san after he retired, I said, I don't know how to retire. I honestly never imagined not. I thought I would die like my friends did during the practice, not on the job, not after retirement. So I don't want to retire and not do architecture. I want to stay close to the built environment somehow. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and listening. My boring story.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us. And I would like to say thank you to everybody coming today to our 33rd local. In 3 weeks, we will hopefully have the next one. I will send you emails and invitations, so please have a look at that. I would like to say thank you once again, and I would like to close this session